this morning we have Dr. Lacey Smith who will provide the content for the training session today. And I'll tell you just a little bit about Dr. Smith. She's the content development manager at Peterson's. She's a former college and high school educator turned test prep expert with more than 15 years of experience helping learners succeed. At Peterson's, Lacey leads the team of content developers who create practice tests, interactives, and other test prep materials. Today, she is here to discuss different tips and strategies that anyone can use when preparing for a test, as well as some of the tools Peterson's offers to help learners make the most of their study time when practicing for the ASVAB or any other major exam. So over to you, Lacey.
Great. Thank you, Marilla. I will also be joined in my presentation by Brian Coyne, who is the General Manager of Test Prep at Peterson's, where he leads the customer support and technology experience teams to ensure that learners using Peterson's test prep materials are set up for success. Brian also has over 15 years of experience in digital applications, education, and online services, and is well-versed in technology. And he, at the end of our presentation, is going to discuss some of the different tools that are available to OASC users and how they can best utilize our suite of Peterson services. So let's just get started here. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. Our presentation today is called Thinking Strategically, Tips and Strategies for Test Prep. Obviously, we'll focus a lot on the OASC since that's central to the DANTES mission. But we're also going to give you some tips and strategies that will help with any test that any learner using DANTES might need to prepare for. So obviously the ASVAB, but I know also that plenty of service members are also taking CLEP tests, SAT, that sort of thing. The tips and strategies we talk about here are all integrated into the OASC, but they also can help you prep for any number of tests. So just an overview of what we'll go over. We'll talk about what the OASC is and its benefits. Then we'll discuss some various tips related to test taking, such as using diagnostic tests, forming a study plan, strategies for effective study, interactive learning, which is especially useful with OASC because we have lots of different ways to engage in interactive learning with the OASC. Some test day reminders and tips for multiple choice questions, considerations for essay exams, and then evaluating progress with practice tests. And at the end, we will bring in some different tools that you can use to support your study. So it's a lot, you know, we'll kind of be speeding through some of it here, but I think it's useful information for anyone. I know from talking to Maribel that some of you are learners, but most of you are also counselors who work with learners. So I'll sort of switch between talking to counselors directly and modeling what counselors can communicate to students. So just to get us started, and I think we can pull up the chat, or someone can pull up the poll for me. So you don't necessarily have to type your answer in the chat box, but how would you describe yourself as a test taker? A, I'm a test taking expert. I always feel confident. I never get nervous. B is, you know, I'm good at preparing, but I do have a little bit of test day jitters. C is, you know, I'm a great test taker, but the preparation really overwhelms me. And D is all of it is a struggle. So I'll give you a second. All right, so most of you say I'm a test taking expert, which I would hope if most of you are counselors that you're test taking experts. Others, you know, we have answers all across the board. I think the important thing to remember is that the tips and strategies we're going to discuss today can help any type of learner prepare, whether there's someone who really feels confident about tests and just wants the edge of having extra ways to prepare, all the way down to someone who is freaking out about any test they could take, no matter how big or small, really doesn't know where to start. We have tips for everybody. The goal isn't to be perfect with tests because I think most of us cannot get a perfect score. That's just not realistic. The goal is to improve over time, use the tools you have, and then be able to deliver the best performance you are capable of. What is the OASC? So many of you are probably familiar with the online academic skills course. It is an adaptive online course. It's administered by the Department of Defense to assist service members in reaching their professional and educational goals. It is free to service members and their families, and offers 24/7 accessibility to a customized experience that appeals to a variety of learning types. OASC focuses on preparing learners, excuse me, OASC focuses on preparing learners with the academic skills they need to do well on the standardized exams that they'll encounter in the military, like the AFCT, or others that they might need to succeed in college, such as the ACT or AccuPlacer. In addition to providing content reviews and practice assessments, the course offers advice on how to use active learning skills, which we'll talk about later, to better understand concepts and retain information. The online academic skills course helps learners build critical test taking skills so they can increase ASVAB scores, improve their AFCT or GT, the general technical scores for reclassification, establish their eligibility for commissioning programs, improve skills in preparation for college courses, prepare for CLEP exams or DSST exams, supplement in-person learning, and a variety of other test taking aims. Depending on a given learner's branch of service, earning the OASC Adapted Course Completion Certificate, which we offer through the OASC, may entitle them to tuition assistance or provide proof of readiness for commissioning programs, officer training, or retaking the AFCT. Enrolling in the OASC is very, very easy. All you have to do is visit dantes.petersons.com, click on sign up, and then you'll indicate your role. The OASC is available for active duty military, reserve, National Guard, military family members, and DoD civilians and family members. Conveniently, it is also available in mobile form, so you can download it from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store if you want to put in some extra study time or practice while you're on the go. There are online and offline versions, so you can use either one to study anytime, anywhere. Excuse me. Right here. All right, so we have another poll. What is the purpose of a diagnostic test? I'm interested to see your answers. All right, so what is the purpose of a diagnostic test? A, it helps the learner become familiar with the testing format. B, it previews the types of questions and topics that will be covered. C, it helps learners diagnose their strengths and weaknesses. D, it offers a framework for learners to plan their study time. Obviously, you may have suspected this. I kind of tricked you a little bit. The answer is all of the above. So all of these are really great benefits of taking a diagnostic test, which are sometimes called pre-assessments or prescriptive tests, depending on how they're used. I know on the OASC, we refer to them as pre-assessments. So anytime you see pre-assessment, that's just a diagnostic test. I'll share results. Like I said, most of you agreed that diagnosing strengths and weaknesses was probably the biggest benefit, and I would agree. But these other benefits are absolutely part of the deal when you take a diagnostic test or when you have a learner do so. All right. So using diagnostic tests, as we noted on the last slide, practice tests help familiarize learners not just with the test format and timing, but also with the types of questions that will be used and the topics that will be addressed. They provide a way to diagnose a learner's strengths and weaknesses, which I like to call areas for improvement because they're not so much weaknesses as places where you have an opportunity to do more learning. This also helps students develop an effective study plan to address all the topics that need to be covered so nothing gets left out. Anxious test takers also benefit from taking diagnostic tests because they help reduce jitters by allowing learners to develop a sort of muscle memory for what it feels like to sit down and take that exam with the time allotted in the test conditions they're given. And that removes the element of surprise. So people who are anxious test takers, that can be really, really helpful for them. Other benefits include learning how long it takes to get through a test and identifying patterns in how test makers created the test to help eliminate incorrect answers, right? So they may notice just by taking a couple practice tests, including a diagnostic test, when an answer is incorrect, it's really, really vague on this test. Like the incorrect answers tend to be vague. Now they have a piece of information that can help them eliminate incorrect answers in the future. Diagnostic tests also give learners a starting point so that when they take practice tests later, they can see just how much progress they've made. While there are some tests that have fewer most standardized exams evaluate test takers in at least 4 scoring categories. Peterson's materials, like those on the OASC, generally include introductory material to help learners understand the categories and topics on which they will be tested. Peterson's diagnostic tests usually provide learners with a chart or other guidance on how the diagnostic test questions correlate with the exam's official scoring categories. The number of questions from any one category on the diagnostic test generally correlates with that topic's weight on the official exam. So for instance, you might have 4 scoring categories and one of them is weighted at 40% and another is weighted at 10%. That obviously means that the one with the 40% weighting, there's going to be a lot more questions on that topic. So I think a lot of learners tend to think that they should study all topics equally, but that's not always the case. There are some topics that are going to get a lot more attention on tests, and these charts can help you sort of recognize how that breaks down into actual question numbers. In this example from a diagnostic test for CLEP introductory psychology, we can see that the topics history, approaches, and methods and social psychology are both weighted more, so a larger portion of the official exam will be devoted to those topics. On the other hand, the categories states of consciousness, motivation and emotion, treatment of psychological disorders, and statistics, tests, and measurement are going to be topics with fewer questions than the average category of the exam. Analyzing scores this way with the weights in mind and with recognizing how the diagnostic test correlates to certain subjects makes it a lot easier for learners to see how they would perform on the test if they were to take it tomorrow without any preparation. And it's also going to help them recognize how real life questions actually correlate with the scoring categories. It makes them much less abstract. Answer explanations, which are always provided with Peterson's practice tests, are helpful because they explain the correct answer, but they also sometimes include information on how incorrect answers may have stumped test takers. Right? As you can see with this particular example, we'll also sometimes give learners a breakdown of the thought process they could use to eliminate incorrect answers. So those answer explanations, in addition to telling learners, why they got a question wrong, they're also going to give them some insight on how to think like a good test taker and how to use process of elimination or mental math or any number of different strategies to arrive at a correct answer quickly when they're taking a test. Learners should always read the answer explanations for questions they got wrong, but even reading the explanations for questions they answered correctly can help reinforce material. This kind of analysis also helps cue metacognitive processes, which we'll discuss more in just a little bit here. So returning to our example from the chart before, so the test taker, they just saw this question. I'm going to go back to the slide. They just saw this question, right, on learning. They got it wrong. They've read through the answer explanation, which told them how they could eliminate A and B and why D and E are incorrect. Then they go to their chart and they say, okay, learning, I got question 7 wrong. That means that I need to focus on the learning category, especially if they also then get question 19 wrong, right? They're like, okay, this is a category I really need to practice. Peterson's materials have been organized in a way that makes it easy for learners to relate the scoring categories on diagnostic tests to the practice materials that they will need to review. Using the chart side by side with the answer explanations makes it easy to relate the raw numbers to the information the diagnostic test covered. I mentioned metacognition. So metacognition is the act of reflecting on what one has learned or knows and how, and developing awareness of one's own thought processes or how one learns. It's basically being aware of like what you are like as a learner and what that means for how you take in information and how you process it. Having awareness of one's learning makes it easy for people to make the most of their study time. If you're kind of just shooting in the dark, you don't know what you're doing. But if you're like, you know what, I am a physical learner. I know that I learn better when I like write notes and when I look over those notes and then I create flashcards. Suddenly you're helping yourself learn a little bit better. Engaging in metacognitive processes like reflection questions translates diagnostic results into meaningful data. Luckily, Peterson's materials often do this for you, and the OASC in particular does this for you, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. But I also wanted to give some examples, for instance, for DSST tests, where students might need to make their own reflections. So some basic diagnostic reflection questions would be, what went well, what caused me stress, or what went well and did not cause me stress, what was easy, then what did I struggle with or what was really stressful for me? And finally, like now that I've taken this test, what do I want to think about when I'm studying? Um, you can break this down into a really sort of molecular level, as I've demonstrated here with the CLEP introductory psychology exam, right? So this student has looked at all of their answers, figured out how many they got right from each category. They've also figured out their strengths and areas for improvement. Um, and they did that for the entire test down here at the bottom with the raw score, but they also did it for individual categories. Um, so this can be really, really useful. Like obviously not every test requires this in-depth of a chart, but if you have, for instance, a learner who's taken the test before and they're really struggling and they don't know why they're not getting the scores they want, helping them break things down in this way can be really, really helpful. It's sort of helping them get a foot into a different way of studying. So what are prescriptive tests, right? You're like, okay, Lacey, you're talking about pre-assessments, you're talking about diagnostics, but what's a prescriptive test? The OASC diagnostic tests, which are labeled pre-assessments in the course, are prescriptive tests. That means that they will use a test taker score to prescribe certain topics for study. So basically, they're taking all the guesswork from that chart that I showed you on the previous slide, and they're turning it into, here are the learning modules that you need to focus on. So it makes it really, really easy when students use the OASC this way, because the pre-assessment will determine if they need additional instruction and what content is unlocked. Now, once they go through the content they've unlocked, they can always go back and see the other content that maybe correlates with their strengths, but they want to review it anyway. But this preliminary evaluation will provide personalized learning paths to target the areas of study each individual learner needs most. So as far as what's on the OASC and how it relates to content and test sections from the ASVAB and the FCT, you can see that paragraph comprehension, for instance, has 2 different course modules. Maybe you're pretty good at grammar, but not as good at reading comprehension. The prescriptive test will figure that out for you and unlock the course modules accordingly. As you can see, the OASC is divided into 14 content modules that cover concepts and skills assessed on the ASVAB and the FCT. They are divided by subject matter, so they will not match up exactly with the broader categories presented on the tests. But since pre-assessment scores are based on how a learner answers the specific question types within each section, they accurately determine which course modules the learner needs to review most. So for example, if you have one learner with lower paragraph comprehension scores, they're going to get more reading comprehension topics. Whereas someone with higher word knowledge scores is going to get fewer vocabulary topics, and so on and so forth. This brings us to our next poll. How much planning do you do before you study? And be honest here. I myself, before I became a test prep expert, was definitely a D. So there's no shame. So A, I make a meticulous study calendar that includes everything I must study down to the minute. B, I figure out how much time I have and then try to divide the topics I cover evenly and decide the order I'll approach them. I should say in, not on, my bad. I don't plan much or at all, but I make sure to touch on every important topic, or I cram everything into the last few days or last few hours, if you're me, my freshman year of college. So I'm driven fully by panic. All right, so as suspected, most of you said B or C, which I think is true of most test takers. I think all of us are guilty of using the approach D at some point in our lives, but most of us figure out pretty quickly that that's not going to serve us well, and we develop either B or C habits. Among the learners who engage with Dantes, I would guess that that's the case as well. Personally, I recommend an approach that's somewhere between A and B for most learners. So it's going to be a little bit more planning than most people are used to doing, but it's ultimately going to serve them well. Scheduling every single thing down to the minute isn't going to work for every person, but you also want to do a little bit more than simply dividing the categories. You want to think about how those categories can spread out across the time that you have to study. This is also why diagnostic tests and prescriptive tests like those on the OASC are so helpful, is because they make it very easy for someone to plan out their studies so that they're hitting everything they need to do. So forming a study plan, it's mostly about asking yourself, again, some pretty important self-reflection questions. While the OASC creates a study plan for learners, there are many tests that service members and their families might be interested in that do not come with prescriptive lessons, such as DSST or Accuplacer. So it's important to know how to make a study plan if you're studying for one of those other tests that isn't the ASVAB or FCT with the OASC. So it involves asking yourself questions like, how much time do I have to study? How do I want to break that time down into workable sections, right? Like if you have 30 hours to study, then you got to figure out, okay, how many weeks do I have? How do I want to break that down? It means figuring out which topics you want to prioritize, how you can include variety, right? Like if you need to spend 5 hours studying one topic, you might be better off breaking that into 1 hour chunks across time rather than studying the same topic every day for a week. It's about thinking about how to help you like hold yourself accountable to that plan. Determining if you want like a calendar or something less formal, making sure you have time to review and evaluating your progress. Goodness, I'm struggling today. Evaluating your progress and making sure that your plan works for your unique learning styles. You can use a diagnostic to plan. So let's say you don't have a chart that's going to help you plan, but you have the diagnostic. That would involve ranking the topics from most in need of improvement to least in need of improvement, determining the chunks of time you're going to spend studying, allocating topics based on that system you created, and just making sure that it has flexibility and enough variety that you don't sort of get sick of the plan. The best study plan is one that you'll actually execute. So you don't want to overexert yourself and make it impossible, but you do want to make sure that you're covering all the topics you need to cover and prioritizing them according to your needs. So an example of how someone might do that. So they've taken the 14 topics on the psychology exam, and I use this one because this is like the most categories I've ever seen on a test. This is just so many categories. But even with this many categories, you can still break it down. It's going to be a lot easier, obviously, if you have like 4 categories. So you'll see the green little highlights are strengths. These are places where the student got the questions correctly. But even then, on their areas for improvement, for motivation and emotion, they're like, you know what? I only guessed. I did get it right, but I only guessed. So maybe I shouldn't consider that a strength necessarily because I just got lucky. On the flip side, you've got the areas for improvement and some of the reflection, right? Like a social psychology, 0 out of 3. I was totally lost. It's a highly weighted section and I got no questions right. That tells me as a test taker, I'm really going to need to spend extra time on that particular scoring category. As you can see, this breaks down, let's say I have 30 available study hours. You can do the exact same thing, right? You have your strengths, you're going to spend a little less time. So biological basis of behavior and sensation perception, only 1 hour. But, you know, as a test taker, I reflected and I think I need a little bit more time on motivation and emotion. So I've made it 1.5 hours. Social psychology, I recognized was my biggest weakness. So I've devoted the most hours to that one. And then breaking down the others categories accordingly. For many students, you can take the exact same breakdown that I showed you on the last page, which is by how much time you want to spend, and translate it to a calendar. Note that there's plenty of opportunity to later revisit topics that were already covered. This is important because as humans, our brains need time to process what we have learned, right? We don't just automatically put things in long-term memory. We need repetition, we need to review, we need to recall in order for things to be important enough for our brains to remember them long-term. So repetition is important for retaining new information. Varying the study topics and creating opportunities for review is the best way to encode new information into long-term memory. I almost said long-term energy, which would be exciting, I suppose. So for example, again, back to social psychology, that was our sample test takers weakest. They have put 1 hour of social psychology every week for the last 4 weeks of study. This is going to give them a chance to really intensely study the information and then recall it again later when they study it again. That helps them also avoid getting bored because if this is a weakness, it's probably the part of the subject they're less interested in. So you also want to avoid boredom because boredom makes it hard to keep going on your test prep journey, right? Um, are there any questions so far? I just want to double check the chat, make sure I'm not. Okay, good, we're good. Feel free to drop some in the chat. I'll check it periodically. All right, yet another poll. Which of the following study strategies helps you most? A, setting up the perfect study environment that suits your unique learning styles and needs. B, collecting a lot of different types of materials so you can look at the topic from different angles. C, creating something with what you learn, or using interactive lessons to make things more interesting. Or D, practicing under test conditions, quiet, no phone, no distractions, timed practice tests. All right. So again, we've got a bunch of different answers across the board. It sounds like interactive learning is helpful for most of you, and I would agree that was probably be my answer. Luckily, the OASC is full of interactives, which I'm about to go over in just a little bit here, that make it really, really easy to study a lot of these topics. Our multimedia team and the content developers on my team and our editors, all of them work together to make these really excellent interactives for your learners. So, oh, sorry, I almost forgot this. So the thing is about study strategies is that they vary a lot because people vary. Anyone who tells you that this one study strategy is going to work for every single person is lying to you. Study strategies, they're different for a reason, right? I, for instance, do my best studying in a coffee shop where there's a bunch of white noise and there's an espresso machine going off and there's music playing in the background. That works really great for me. All that white noise kind of helps me concentrate. Another person, it's going to be torture to them to try and study in that environment. So the important thing to emphasize is figuring out which strategies work for you and then building on those strategies over time. That said, there are some basic strategies that really do, like, again, not apply to every single person, but are typically recognized by scientific studies and psychologists as working really well for most learners. So one is that it's not good to cram. Most of us have been guilty of cramming at some point in our lives, but it just doesn't help most test takers. It's much better to start early, spread study sessions out over time, and go without large gaps between study sessions. It's also better to study intensely rather than passively. I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to sit down for 5 hours and I'm just going to study every single subject and I'm going to take my whole Saturday to do it. And that could be good, but it's also like your brain kind of gets tired at a certain point and it's not going to keep retaining new information. So most people are much better served by short, intense intervals, like say an hour of really intense study where you're making flashcards or developing your own sort of test questions. Doing this sort of really active learning for these intense short periods on a regular basis is going to be much better than these long periods that are spread out. Active learning, which we'll discuss in more depth just in a bit here, is also really important. So planning your work ahead of time, being strategic and careful with your reading, taking notes and assessing progress. That's all going to make you much more involved in your own learning. So for any test taker who's trying to improve their score, engaging in those active learning practices is a must. And then also just thinking about your study environment. Like I said about the coffee shop, like for me, that would be really useful. For a lot of people, that would not be useful. So think about what's going to work for you as a learner. Another thing is dividing both information and study tasks into chunks. So information could be like, there's math, and then there's English and that sort of thing. But you can also think about study time. Like I'm going to spend my first 20 minutes reviewing my notes, my next 20 minutes using practice questions, and my last 20 minutes reviewing flashcards with key terms, right? So you've taken those study tasks and you've broken them down. Anytime you can break information or tasks down into chunks, they become much more approachable. This is especially true for people with any kind of focus issues. I myself have ADHD. If I try to do the same thing for 90 minutes, it's going to be useless. But if I break it down into 20 minutes of this, 20 minutes of that, then I can really, really do that. It's also important to vary topics and weave them together as you learn. When I say weave together, I don't just mean, put English and math side by side, but I mean also look for connections between the different topics. So for instance, if you have a very mathematical mind, there are mathematical ways to think about grammar. What could that look like for you? Taking time to summarize what you've learned at the end of each study session will really tell you if you've learned it or not. If you can't summarize it, you probably need to devote more time to studying it. Ditto the idea of teaching the concepts to someone else, like even if it's your cat, teach a cat some geometry, that'd be fine. But taking the time to like think about what you would say to someone if you were trying to teach it to them, it's really hard to teach something if you don't know it. If you can teach it easily, you've probably retained the information. Encoding new information meaningfully, that sounds very fancy, but really what that just means is relating it to your own life, right? So if I'm trying to understand percentages and it's really abstract and it's not working for me, but I start thinking about, oh, well, when I'm at my job and I'm making discounts, I have to think about percentages. Suddenly percentages isn't abstract. It's applied to my life and I can make a lot more money from it. Also engaging in active learning, like interactive learning, like we said, very helpful, as are practice tests and other materials for assessing your progress. Active learning techniques. So active learning is learning that requires the learner to actively participate in their own acquisition of knowledge. We tend to think of learning, at least in the United States, as being very passive, right? You sit in your desk and your teacher lectures you, and somehow you just absorb all the information and then you're a genius, right? But that is not really how learning works. Learning has to be pretty active for most people to retain information. Excuse me. So here are a few useful active learning techniques. You can create something from what you've learned, such as writing your own practice questions or tests. You can develop a visual aid that helps you make sense of new information, like a mind map. Or when I was a teacher, I had a student who used to make these little drawings every time she learned a new German vocabulary word. And I thought it was genius because she was connecting that physical learning and that visual cue to the words she was learning. Using different sensory modes, auditory, visual, physical, etc. Seeking out additional resources, oh my goodness, such as, sorry, distracted, 1 second. All right, seeking out additional resources to expand your understanding, such as reading textbooks from the library, creating materials for repetitive learning, like flashcards, drills, that sort of thing. If that works for you, that can be especially useful. Keeping a glossary of key terms, ideally that you have defined yourself in your own words rather than just repeating someone else's definition, because that kind of takes it to a no level. I just also wanted to add really quickly about active learning and also metacognition, which we were talking about. The OASC includes an entire section for learners who are interested in it on the science of learning. So if you have learners who are like, this metacognition is really helping me, you can direct them to that section in the OASC, and they'll have a lot of materials available to them to help them sort of maximize their approach to their own learning style. Interactive learning. So most Peterson's projects, but especially OASC, because we've really taken the time to add all this interactivity to it, contain numerous opportunities to engage in interactive learning. So this includes hands-on activities, flashcards, interactive online lessons, which we have a lot of different types of, informative videos, which are videos you just sort of watch passively, interactive videos, which require you to interact, whether it be like a quick quiz or answering a question. Also any self-designed interactive materials. So like we have flashcards, but students may also want to make their own flashcards in real life that they can flip through. That's still interactive learning. And diagnostic and practice tests are also a form of interactive learning because you're interacting with the test material by reading the answer explanations and analyzing your own learning. So in the next few slides, I have some examples of the different types of interactives that Peterson's has available to OASC users. So one is just, plain videos, right? Like, so this one on order of operations, it breaks down all of the different math required and makes it really easy for students to see, kind of using this chalkboard style, how these math problems could be solved. We also have flashcards for a variety of topics. This one is vocabulary flashcards, so it gives you not only the definition, but an example sentence. We have numerous interactive slideshows. So students can click through the slides and learn different things. And then some slides themselves include interactives within the slideshow. So for instance, this one is a drag and drop where you would match the picture, disease, and manifestation, and then it would give you feedback instantly. And that instant feedback is really, really useful because a lot of times you're studying and you don't actually know if you're doing anything right, but the interactives will tell you if you're doing anything right. They will tell you if you got something wrong or not, so you can immediately kind of figure out where you went wrong if you answered incorrectly, or feel assured that you got it correct. Drag and drop activities. So for instance, this one, as you can see, you can drag the picture to match it to where it goes in the, I think this is called a Punnett square. I am an English teacher, so we have biology teachers who write this stuff for us. Information hotspots. So as you can see, there's lots of different photos here, and you click on one and it tells you about what you're looking at. Interactive diagrams. So the one on the left, there's no little hotspots on it, but they're, and I didn't get a chance to like put this in the screenshot, but below it, there were some drop-down menus that would show you about different parts of the interactive, or the diagram rather. And then the one on the right is an interactive diagram with hotspots, right? So you'd hit any of these pluses and it would give you information on the pituitary gland or the adrenal gland, for instance. Tables and charts, classic for a reason, very useful. They make it easy to visualize information, especially for those who consider themselves visual learners. It can take information that would otherwise not be very approachable and make it approachable. This is also a great thing to make for yourself. If you're someone who needs to actively make some of your own interactives, taking information and creating a table or chart out of it is one of the easiest ways to do so. Interactive timelines. So this one is on fetal development. So we have information based on where someone is at in the timeline, and students can sort of scroll through and see what's going on there. Progress quizzes, as you might expect, they're pretty simple questions, but it is important because, again, you don't necessarily want to wait till the very end of your study to get through any of that information. You want sort of immediate feedback, and that's what progress quizzes can do for learners. There's also time for reflection questions, right? So again, we called it a metacognitive moment, but taking time to reflect on your learning, like what's working out, what has not sunk in, what do I need to look at later? That makes it so that you're not sort of just like, guessing at what to look at. You're definitely really looking at what is going to be most useful for you. So by the way, this is not an exhaustive list of the types of interactives that are available in the OASC or other Peterson's products. In fact, my content team and the multimedia team, we have made it a mutual goal to try a new interactive type each major project. So we are always expanding the types of interactive learning opportunities we can provide learners and looking for yet another way for students to get the information they need so they can really succeed when they take their tests. That's our ultimate goal always. So this one's open-ended, and I'd like you to answer in the chat box. Why or how do interactives like these help learners retain information? What is your impression of why that's the case? If it doesn't work, we'll go on a second. Okay, I see Janet saying it customizes each learning style. Exactly, right? So what we were talking about with students being different, so different things work for different people. Different types of interactives work better for different people. I am a flashcard gal. I can learn anything from a flashcard. They don't necessarily work for everybody, but they really, really work for me. Drag and drops, for instance, making that learning physical, even if it's just like moving your mouse, that physical connection can really help some people start applying information. All right, well, feel free to add your answers as we go along, or just use it as a reflection question for yourself, right? Like why or how can these interactives be helpful, especially for the test takers I work with through Dantes. So there's a few key study strategies, right? So not so much test strategies as much as like thinking about how you're going to study. One, as you probably suspect based on us talking about the planning, is to manage your time. You don't want to get to the couple days before your test and realize that there's an entire scoring category you never covered. So managing your time is really, really important. The second would be practice testing conditions. Even if you just take one practice test, doing so under proper testing conditions, meaning on the type of, either on paper or digitally, ideally, with the OASC based on the type of test it is, but also thinking about the time limits, thinking about how quiet or loud it'll be where you're testing. All those things matter. Evaluating the stakes. So this just means, for some people, they may really need to pass a certain test to reclassify or to get into an educational program they want, whatever it is. Like, they might have really, really high stakes. For other people, it might be like, oh, I want to take this CLEP test so I don't have to take a course in college. And that's important, but it's not going to be the same stakes as someone who really is counting on a test for career advancement. And that doesn't mean that somebody who has higher stakes should be more worried about the test. It just means that they should take the planning and executing of the test prep time that much more seriously. So really thinking about what you have at stake in this test. If it's a low stakes test, that doesn't mean don't study, but it means, you probably don't need to freak out very much. And building confidence, which all of these different test prep approaches can help people build confidence. I'm actually going to skip for time some of the things that we've talked about, but just some general test day reminders and tips. So understand the directions, be familiar with the scoring categories, feel rested and make sure you've eaten. I think students forget this one a lot in my experience as a teacher. They'll be like, oh, I didn't even have breakfast today. They're taking a 2-hour test. So just make sure you actually eat. On test day, answer every question. Don't skip questions unless it's a specific test where that can hurt you, which is not very many tests. Most tests do not penalize for guessing. Use all your allotted time, make time to review. If you aren't required to answer in a certain order, prioritize those you can answer easiest. Be certain of your answers, which isn't to say never guess, but sort of have a reason why you picked the one you picked, even if you're guessing. And guess on as few answers as possible. For multiple choice questions, it's important to read the entire question stem closely, read every answer option before choosing, right? Sometimes two seem plausibly correct. When that happens, you want to choose the best answer. Usually one is either too vague or too specific, and one is a much better answer to that specific question. Use smart guessing strategies by using the process of elimination, guessing at unfamiliar vocabulary using your knowledge of word parts or similar words, looking for patterns and incorrect answer options, right? So I mentioned like they tend to be too vague, too specific, too broad, or not related to the question, are like the 4 things that incorrect answers tend to be. And when you really have no idea, just go with your gut, because your gut might be telling you that answer for a reason. I'm going to skip some of these so that we can get to the tools, but basically, I did want to say this for those taking essay exams. A thesis statement is really important. So a thesis statement is a single sentence that states your argument, and it should be concise, specific, and argumentative. And then practice tests, you can use the same way you use diagnostic tests, right? But you're going to be evaluating them in a different way. You're going to be thinking about how much progress have I made? What areas of improvement can I still identify for these last few review sessions? And how can the answer explanation sort of help me remember some of these important ideas for test day? So with all that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brian Coyne now, who is going to discuss some of the tools that can support your study as a OASC user. And I'll go through the slides for you, Brian. You can just tell me next slide if that works.
Yeah, it sounds great. And thank you, Lacey, for going through that kind of in-depth review about how learners can utilize Peterson's tools and some of the other just tips of the trade that folks can think about when they're helping others or when they're getting set up themselves. Some of the things we'll talk about will actually lead into some of the things that Lacey mentioned as well. So what additional help and tools are available to you as a part of the Dantes OASC program? There's an academic help desk. So if you log in through dantes.petersons.com, which we shared the link here at the beginning, we do have an academic help desk. Here you can ask any question about math, English, science, put in that question, and you're going to get a response from an expert to your individual question. This is great if you don't have time for kind of live tutoring. You just have a quick question. I don't understand why this was the answer to this specific question. It's a great way to do that. It's kind of asynchronous way to get an answer to any question that you have. This is actually less utilized than the next slide, Lacey.
Got you.
You're good, no problem. Which is our tutoring. So we have two different components of this. It's live tutoring and then our writing lab. So this is for any real-time tutoring or any written assignment review. It's going to cover more topics than just the help desk. That's math, humanities, which includes English and everything else there, social science, natural science, computer science, Spanish, any other general topics that you want to cover. We can get you connected with the right tutor. You get these questions answered in real time, which is fantastic. You get to dive into an untimed, unlimited tutoring session. These are really fantastic. I'll touch on exactly how they work here in a moment. And then you're getting somebody else to either help you through a core problem that you faced as you went through your studying, or to help you to review a written assignment or a sample essay, whatever it is you're working through in kind of written format, and get them reviewed by an expert as well. If we go to the next slide. So this is just an example of what happens. Again, these are both available, both the academic help desk and the tutoring, on the dantes.petersons.com homepage once you're logged in. But the tool will easily take you through what subject you need help with. You choose some of those details, fill out a little bit more information to get connected with the right tutor. And then over on the right-hand side is an example of the workspace that you're going to be placed into with a tutor. This particular one doesn't have somebody in there, but it'll actually be a video of a person, should you want that, or it can just be audio. But then they're actually going to work together with the student to take you through problems, to whiteboard, to diagram, really whatever the problem is. And they will spend that time with you to make sure that you get the answers that you need. So we run thousands of these. The reviews on them are amazing, like a 4.95 out of 5 score. So students are coming through, they're spending time. The amount of students who spend 45 minutes in here kind of surprised me when I look at the data sometimes, but it means that they're getting value and they're going through everything they need to. So do encourage students as they have questions, as they need to work through topics. As Lacey mentioned, if they go through a diagnostic and they know that they're weak in an area, go spend time with a tutor, go spend 45 minutes, go spend an hour and go through that concept or the theory or whatever it is that they're having trouble with in a bit more depth with an expert. If you go to the next slide. And then we have the writing lab. So this is where you have a written piece of content, whether it be an essay, an assignment, and you want to get that reviewed. So you can take that paper via either Microsoft Word or Google Drive. You upload it into the system. You let us know a little bit more about what that paper is about, what the intention of it is, and they're going to go through and review it. You'll see the first bullet point under that paper format image there is like, does this paper have a clear focus, purpose, thesis statement, as Lacey was just mentioning there. So we're going to review it for content, going to review it for grammar, going to review it to see if it matches up to any kind of format or style guide like we have selected here for MLA. So this is really across anything that the students are trying to get looked at from a written format. Could be a college application essay, really, you name it. This is available for review. Typically, it's going to be reviewed in a few hours, sometimes the next day. But again, just a great way if students are even preparing for a test that has an essay component, do a sample essay, fill it out, send it in, see what revisions come back, and then see where some of the areas are that you can kind of work on as you go through a real-time kind of essay generation as well. All right, next slide. So that's it for those extended tools. Again, as Lacey mentioned, dozens, hundreds, thousands of interactives through the courses, plenty of learning content, hundreds of thousands of practice questions across all the courses we offer here at Peterson. So there is content that's available out there to prepare students for any test. and we're here to support. So if you have any issues, questions, want to know what you have access to, please reach out to our support team at support@petersons.com.